King Henry VIII of England had only 3 wives, because 3 of his marriages were annulled by the Church of England. However, he was never granted an annulment by the Pope, as he desired, for Catherine of Aragon, his first wife. Annulments declare that a true marriage never took place, unlike a divorce, in which a married couple end their union. Along with his 6 wives, Henry took several mistresses. Catherine of Aragon was Henry's first wife. After the death of Arthur, her first husband and Henry's brother, a papal dispensation was obtained to enable her to marry Henry, though the marriage did not occur until he came to the throne. Catherine became pregnant in 1510, but the girl was stillborn. She became pregnant again in 1511 and gave birth to Henry, Duke of Cornwall, who died almost 2 months later. She gave birth to a stillborn boy in 1513, and to another boy who died within hours in 1515. Finally, she bore a healthy daughter, Mary, in 1516. It was 2 years before she conceived again. The pregnancy ended with a short-lived girl. It is said that Henry truly loved Catherine of Aragon, as he professed it many times. Henry, at the time a Roman Catholic, sought the Pope's approval for an annulment on the grounds that Catherine had first been his brother's wife. He used a passage from the Old Testament Leviticus: "If a man shall take his brother's wife, it is an impurity. He hath uncovered his brother's nakedness, they shall be childless." Henry had begun an affair with Anne Boleyn, who refused to become his mistress. Despite the Pope's refusal to annul the marriage, Henry separated from Catherine in 1531. He ordered the highest church official in England, Thomas Cranmer, Archbishop of Canterbury, to convene a court. On May 23, 1533, Cranmer ruled the marriage to Catherine null and void. On May 28, 1533, he pronounced the king legally married to Anne, with whom Henry had already secretly exchanged wedding vows. This led to England breaking from the Roman Catholic Church and the establishment of the Church of England. Anne Boleyn was Henry's second wife and the mother of Elizabeth I. Henry's marriage to Anne and her execution made her a key figure in the political and religious upheaval at the start of the English Reformation. She was the daughter of Sir Thomas Boleyn and Lady Elizabeth Boleyn. Anne resisted the king's attempts to seduce her and refused to become his mistress as her sister Mary Boleyn had been. It soon became the one absorbing object of the king's desires to secure a divorce from his wife Catherine of Aragon so that he could marry Anne. He wrote a love letter that provides evidence of some level of intimacy between them, in which he admires her pretty duckies' breasts. It eventually became clear that Pope Clement VII was unlikely to give the king an annulment, so Henry began to break the power of the Catholic Church in England. Henry and Anne went through a secret wedding service. She soon became pregnant, and there was a second, public wedding service in London on January 25, 1533. Cranmer declared the marriage of Henry and Catherine null and void and declared the marriage of Henry and Anne to be good and valid. Soon after, the Pope launched sentences of excommunication against the king and the archbishop. As a result of Anne's marriage to the king, the Church of England was forced to break with Rome and was brought under the king's control. Anne was crowned Queen Consort of England on June 1, 1533, and she gave birth to Henry's second daughter Elizabeth on September 7. She failed to produce a male heir, her only son being stillborn. Henry grew tired of her and had their marriage annulled. Thomas Cromwell devised a plot to execute her. Despite unconvincing evidence, she was found guilty and beheaded on May 19, 1536 for adultery, incest, and high treason. After the coronation of her daughter, Elizabeth I, Anne was venerated as a martyr and heroine of the English Reformation. Jane Seymour was Henry's third wife. She served Catherine of Aragon as maid of honor and was one of Anne Boleyn's ladies-in-waiting. Jane, the daughter of John Seymour, a knight, and Marjorie Wentworth, was most likely born at Wiltshire, although Westbower Manor in Somerset has also been suggested. Her birth date is not recorded. She was the most lower birth than most of Henry's wives, only being able to read and write a little, but was much better at needlework and household management, which were considered much more necessary. Jane married Henry VIII on May 20, 1536, at the Palace of Whitehall, London, the day after Anne Boleyn's execution. Almost a year and a half after marriage, Jane gave birth to a male heir, Edward, but she died 12 days later from postpartum complications. Henry suffered genuine grief, as she was the only one of his wives to receive a queen's burial. When he died, he was buried next to her in St. George's Chapel, Windsor Castle. Anne of Cleves was a German princess, Henry's wife, and queen consort of England, although not crowned, for just 6 months in 1540, from January 6 to July 9. Henry may have referred to her as a Flanders mare, and the label has stuck. Her pre-contract of marriage with Francis I, Duke of Lorraine, was cited as grounds for annulment, even though their marriage did not proceed. Anne did not resist the annulment, claiming the marriage had not been consummated, and was rewarded with a generous settlement including Hever Castle, the former home of the Bullens, Henry's former in-laws. She was given the name the King's Sister, and was a lifelong friend to him and his children. She outlived the king and all his wives, dying at Chelsea Old Manor on July 16, 1557. The most likely cause of her death was cancer. She was buried in Westminster Abbey on August 3. Catherine Howard was Henry's fifth wife between 1540 to 1542, sometimes known as the Rose Without a Thorn. She was the daughter of Lord Edmund Howard and Joyce Culpeper, cousin to Anne Boleyn, the second wife of Henry VIII, and niece to Thomas Howard, 3rd Duke of Norfolk. Thomas Howard was a prominent politician at Henry's court, and he secured her a place in the household of Henry's fourth wife, Anne of Cleves, where Catherine caught the king's interest. She married him on July 28, 1540 at Oatlands Palace in Surrey, just 19 days after the annulment of his marriage to Anne. He was 49, and she was still a teenager, at about 17 years old. Henry was informed of her alleged adultery with Thomas Culpeper, her distant cousin, on November 1, 1541. Catherine was stripped of her title as queen in November 1541 and was beheaded 3 months later on the grounds of treason for committing adultery. Catherine Parr was the sixth and last wife of Henry VIII, from 1543 to 1547. She was the daughter of Thomas Parr of Kendal and his wife, Maud Green. Through her father, Catherine was a descendant of John of Gaunt, son of King Edward III. Through John of Gaunt's daughter Joan Beaufort, Countess of Westmoreland, she was Henry's third cousin, once removed by Henry's paternal descent from another of John of Gaunt's children. Catherine showed herself to be the restorer of Henry's court as a family home for his children. She was determined to present the royal household as a close-knit one to demonstrate strength through unity to Henry's opposition. Perhaps Catherine's most significant achievement was Henry's passing of an act that confirmed both Mary's and Elizabeth's line in succession for the throne, despite the fact that they had both been made illegitimate by divorce or remarriage. Such was Henry's trust in Catherine that he chose her to rule as regent while he was attending to the war in France, and in the unlikely event of the loss of his life, she was to serve as regent until 9-year-old Edward came of age. Catherine also has a special place in history as she was the most married queen of England, having had 4 husbands in all. Henry was her third. She had been widowed twice before marrying Henry. After Henry's death, she married Thomas Seymour, uncle of Edward VI of England, to whom she had formed an attachment before her marriage with Henry. She had one child by Seymour, named Mary, and died shortly after childbirth. Lady Mary's history is unknown, but she is not believed to have survived childhood.